I'm Ava Sterling, 32 years old, the daughter of Raymond Sterling publishing magnate, media gatekeeper, and depending on who you ask, one of the last true gentlemen of New York's old guard. To the world, he's a philanthropist and legend. To me, he's the man who once looked me in the eye and said, "Don't embarrass yourself, Ava. Just stay home and watch the gala online." So I did. What he didn't know, what he still doesn't know, not really, is that I wasn't just watching. I was paying for it. The message came on a Wednesday, a soft chime from my phone, mid-email, barely noticeable. I was finalizing contracts for a new international partnership, one that would double our platform's reach in Asia. On the surface, it looked like any other corporate notification, but I knew that subject line. Sterling Foundation Winter Gala, final schedule. I hadn't been sent the schedule. It had been forwarded to me by Lauren, an event coordinator I hired through my private PR firm. She'd been working double shifts behind the scenes to orchestrate the final pieces. She was professional enough not to ask why I wouldn't be attending the event I was secretly underwriting. I scrolled through the file, sipping now cold coffee, my fingers pausing on the name bolded at the top of the host list. Honorary chair, Raymond Sterling. Of course. Below his name were the usual suspects: my brother Nathan, fresh off his latest Forbes 30 Under 30 feature, a few old board members from Harper's Journal, and a curated list of political friends my father had cultivated like bonsai trees over the decades. I wasn't on the list. Not as a guest, not as a donor, not even as a +1. That wasn't new. They stopped inviting me in person 4 years ago, ever since I turned down a cushy PR job at Sterling & Company, and chose instead to bootstrap a platform no one in my family respected. A writing site, my father called it. Like he couldn't say startup without choking. The first time I was left off the invite list, I pretended it was an oversight. I even called my mother, though we hadn't spoken in months. She sounded exhausted. "Oh, Ava, it's just a small thing this year. You know how the RSVPs work. We had to keep the list manageable." That year, the gala seated 326 people. I know because I got a hold of the table chart. I didn't call her this time. This time, I let the silence confirm what I already knew. They'd built the entire night as if I didn't exist. As if I hadn't spent the last 7 years scraping together a business from rented co-working desks, 2 failed seed rounds, and a gut-deep refusal to disappear. They never saw the all-nighters, the ramen, the blisters from bike deliveries in Brooklyn winters to pay for server space, the panic attacks in borrowed bathrooms before investor meetings. All they saw, if they ever bothered to look, was a daughter too proud to join the family machine. The phone rang later that evening. I let it go to voicemail. It was Dad. "Just wanted to say Nathan's doing the opening address this year. He's really made us proud. I hope you'll watch online. You know, from home. No pressure, no seat, no name." I watched the family's media blitz with the same detachment I use when applying eyeliner. Steady hand, no emotion. There they were on Channel 9, all 3 of them. Dad in his tailored navy suit, my mother with her signature icy bob, Nathan in an overstarched tux he likely rented just for the rehearsal. The anchors gushed about legacy, about culture, about what it meant to carry a name like Sterling. No one mentioned me. The camera panned to a shot of the old Harper's building downtown, the one they turned into an event space after downsizing. I used to ride my scooter past it as a kid, dreaming of publishing stories one day. I'd press my face to the window and imagine rows of editors debating the future of American storytelling. Now it would host 400 elite guests, all dressed to the nines to toast the future of a legacy I had no part in. But the thing about being invisible is that it gives you leverage. You become a ghost. And ghosts go where they want. They hear what's whispered. They don't announce their return. 2 years ago, after my company hit its first 1,000,000 users, I approached the Sterling Foundation under the name of a shell brand, Bright Quill, a literary empowerment project for underrepresented writers. Sounded vague, benevolent, safe. They welcomed the sponsorship with open arms. This year, Bright Quill would be the headline sponsor, with exclusive brand control over the final segment of the gala, a legacy in literature tribute, including a custom short film, visual projection mapping, and a 3-minute founder message. I didn't write the speech until the day before. The week of the gala, Lauren texted me updates like a seasoned spy. She had no idea who I really was, beyond the quiet CEO with very specific lighting requests. Lauren, Wednesday, 9:14 p.m. Final script accepted by production. Lauren, Thursday, 11:22 a.m. Confirmed speech is last segment. Lauren, Friday, 3:36 p.m. Sterling family arrived early for sound check. And finally, Lauren, Saturday, 7:01 p.m. Showtime. I watched the live stream from my Brooklyn loft. Exposed brick, secondhand rug, takeout on the counter. My kind of stage. The camera swept over the ornate venue, its walls decked with string lights and oversized floral installations that looked like they'd been plucked from a Wes Anderson fever dream. A string quartet played softly in the background. Crystal chandeliers flickered above a seated crowd of New York's elite. At the center of it all, the Sterling table. Dad, head of the table, sharp as ever, chin high. Nathan beside him scrolling through his notes. My mother sipping something clear and expensive. Their laughter, even through the stream, had that smooth, performative edge I recognized from childhood. They looked so sure of themselves. When the anchor announced the final segment, I saw it in my father's body language. That slow lean back, the half smile. He thought it was about him. And now, we close this remarkable evening with a special tribute from our presenting sponsor, Bright Quill, a foundation supporting literary voices of the future. The lights dimmed, the music shifted, and the screen cut to black. Then a pulse of soft light, a page turning, words typed in slow rhythm, a female voice narrating, low and steady. They said my stories were too quiet, too strange, that no one would read a voice like mine. The screen shifted. Old footage, public school classrooms, a girl in a hoodie scribbling in a notebook, a rejection letter crumpled, the same girl standing on a rooftop overlooking a city that had forgotten her name. So I wrote anyway. The logo emerged first as a pen, then a name. Not Bright Quill, not Sterling, just mine. Ava Sterling. Back in the venue, the camera lingered. Long enough to capture the moment my father's face changed. His smile faltered, his jaw tightened. Nathan stared, confused. My mother blinked once, twice. And somewhere in the front row, someone whispered, "Wait, isn't that his daughter?" I leaned back in my chair, set down my glass, and closed the laptop slowly. The applause on the stream was awkward, hesitant, caught between admiration and discomfort. The stream faded to black, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, my father had to sit through something he couldn't interrupt, deny, or revise. My voice, in his house, on his night. You'd be surprised how many ways a family can tell you you're a mistake without ever raising their voice. They do it in how they introduce you at parties. They do it in seating charts. They do it in what they remember and what they don't. I wasn't the rebellious one. I wasn't the wild child. I didn't drink in high school or sneak out of windows. I followed rules, kept curfews, got good grades. I didn't fail. I just failed to impress, because I wasn't what they ordered. I was born in a penthouse on the Upper West Side. Not literally the birth happened at Mount Sinai, but we were driven home to that penthouse, 12 floors up, overlooking Central Park. Sterling ink was barely dry on the first Harper's acquisition. Dad still smelled like ambition back then. Sharp suits, sharper presence. The kind of man who could walk into a restaurant and silence it just by lifting a brow. Nathan was already 2 years old. He had the smile, the charm, the salesman genes. My grandmother used to say he was made for the camera. He knew how to make people lean in. I didn't. My earliest memory isn't a birthday party or a family vacation. It's a dinner. Long table, silver candlesticks, velvet drapes so heavy they made the room darker than it needed to be. I was 5. I just read a book cover to cover a few months earlier than the school expected. I waited for someone to ask about it. No one did. Nathan was busy explaining how he'd made it across the monkey bars at the country club playground without falling once. "Attaboy," Dad said, raising his glass. My mother smiled and clapped. I said nothing, and that silence followed me like a shadow for the next 25 years. By middle school, I'd built a system. Speak only when called upon. Hide your notebooks. Don't interrupt Nathan's sports stories. If you win anything, downplay it. The year I won a citywide essay competition, a piece about urban loneliness told through the metaphor of a cracked sidewalk, my father asked me why I hadn't written about business instead. "Everyone's lonely," he said, folding the certificate like a receipt. "Write about something that matters." He meant profit. I got into Bronx science by merit. No legacy help, no donation strings. My mother told her friends it was a shame I wouldn't be joining Nathan at East Grove Prep. "She's bright," she said at brunch, "just not very polished." Polished, like silverware. I started a student publication at 16. Offset, a place for weird writing. Stories that didn't always resolve. Narratives that looped. Letters to no one. People sent things in from all 5 boroughs' teenagers with nowhere else to send their words. My father read a copy once. I found it in the trash bin in his study, folded under an invitation to a charity yacht event. "I don't get it," he said, sipping scotch. "What's the point of a magazine no one pays for?" "Connection," I answered. He didn't even look up. The first time I was publicly erased was during Nathan's senior year gala at East Grove. He was the class president, valedictorian, and lead in the school musical. A triple threat, according to the local paper. We were seated in the front row, Dad, Mom, me in the middle. A photographer came by, one of those with a cheap smile and a snap-happy finger. "Can I get a shot of the proud family?" she asked. Before I could even blink, my father angled himself toward Nathan and my mother. His arm went around them. The photographer framed them carefully. I was out of the shot literally and symbolically. No one said anything. Not then, not after. By college application season, I'd stopped trying to be seen. Nathan went to Columbia. I applied to NYU. Not the fancy programs, not Tisch, just the College of Arts and Science, English major, creative writing concentration. "Of course you did," Dad muttered when he saw the acceptance letter. "More poetry." I got in with a full ride. He never noticed. At New York University, I began to come alive in ways no one back home could have imagined. I joined a literary circle that met in dusty cafes and whispered about voice and silence and syntax. I started freelancing, ghostwriting, content shaping. I learned that some people pay good money to say what they're too afraid to articulate. I also learned that talent doesn't mean much without resilience. I published 3 essays that year, one about my brother, one about invisibility, one called The Family Portrait Without a Face. None of them were under my real name. My visits home became brief, mechanical. Holidays, obligations, required appearances. At one Christmas dinner when I was 20, Nathan toasted his new internship at a boutique investment firm downtown. The table applauded. Champagne flutes clinked. My father asked if I was still typing away at that blog. "I'm writing a piece about women and spatial erasure," I said, just to provoke him. "What does that even mean?" He laughed. "Are you a writer or a ghost hunter?" The room laughed with him. I laughed too. But later that night, I walked alone to the terrace, stared down at the lights of Manhattan, and thought about how easy it was for someone like him to destroy a person without ever touching them. I moved out officially at 21. They never offered to help me move. Nathan said I should just get an Airbnb until I figured things out. I rented a walk-up in Fort Greene with peeling paint and a rusted tub. I bought a futon and used it for everything: sleeping, eating, dreaming. It was during those quiet, sometimes bitterly cold nights that I started building. No one knew what I was doing. Least of all my family. I told them I was doing content work. They assumed that meant listicles or product reviews. They didn't ask. I didn't correct them. By the time my father published his 40th anniversary Harper's memoir, a 300-page self-congratulations spiral, I'd grown my user base to 200,000. He didn't mention me in the acknowledgments, but he thanked Nathan twice. My mother still sends me a birthday card every year. White linen paper, gold trim, blank inside except for one line: "Keep shining, Mom." I used to cry after opening them. Now I just slide them into a drawer I never open. If I had to name the moment I knew I wasn't coming back, not as a daughter, not as a niece, not as anything that could be seated at their table again, it was during my cousin Lydia's wedding. My invite arrived 6 days before the event. No +1, no hotel room, no family table. My place card read Pen Ms. A. Sterling. No relation. That night, as Nathan gave a smug toast about legacy, my father laughed so loud the chandeliers quivered, and I just sat there, Ms. A. Sterling, finishing my wine, already drafting the first line of my next build. You don't build an empire on vengeance. At least not at first. At first, you build it on silence. On nights that stretch so long they stop being nights. On hunger not the physical kind, but the one that starts in your ribs and eats toward your spine. You build it because not building it would mean vanishing entirely. That's how mine began. The first version of what would become my company wasn't even a company. It was a Google Doc with a title so generic I almost forgot it: Open Calls, Lit Spaces. I started it during a January freeze in my second year after college, too broke to afford heat for more than 3 hours a day. I'd bike to the corner cafe, buy a single espresso, and nurse it like a sacrament while scrolling Reddit and poetry forums, trying to find places that would accept unknown voices with nothing to show but ache. There were dozens of writers like me, but no home for us. The platforms that existed, Medium, Blogger, even Tumblr in its dying gasp, treated writing like noise. Everything was gamified, optimized, flattened. Art became content. Stories had to have click-throughs or character counts or SEO plugins to even survive the algorithm. And the worst part? Most of us didn't care about virality. We just wanted to be heard. The first person I built for was a trans poet from Ohio named River. We met in a private Discord server. They sent me a 3-page essay that read like a broken piano key, jagged, haunting, beautiful. No one would publish it. So I did. I made a 1-page HTML site. Custom font, black background, white serif. I hosted it on a domain I paid for with money I earned ghostwriting breakup letters. I called it Page 1. The tagline was stolen from River's email. I just want to exist somewhere for real. For a while, that's all it was. A corner of the internet with no ads, no likes, no comment sections, just voice. I added a submission link, no fees, No word limits, no rules. Submissions poured in. From Delhi, from Iowa, from a girl in Morocco who wrote about silence like it was a color, from a teenager in Toronto whose first line made me cry in the middle of a train. I stayed up until 3 a.m. most nights. Not because I had to, but because the pages were good. Not polished, not commercial, but raw and real and sacred in ways I hadn't seen since high school, when I thought literature was church. I kept my day jobs, some ghostwriting, some freelance editing. At one point, I was writing dating bios for a tech founder who couldn't hold a conversation longer than 3 texts. The money was trash, the feedback worse. "You're over-intellectualizing Tinder," he said once. "You use too many commas." I smiled, sent him his bios, took the money, paid hosting for 6 more weeks of page 1. 2 years in, I still hadn't told anyone. Not even Lauren, who'd become a close friend during our shifts at an East Village creative agency that folded in 6 months. She once asked me what I did after hours. I said, sleep, think, eat frozen dumplings. She didn't press. She was kind like that. My break, if you can call it that, came from a DM I almost deleted. It was a screenshot of one of our pages. A story by someone named Elias. Title, How to Die Without Your Body Knowing. The message just said, "Who runs this site? We want to talk." It was from a senior content strategist at Aurelia, a small but growing arts tech collective in Berlin. They were curating digital lit platforms with authentic community voice at Pinjas for a new partnership with an EU cultural grant. I responded 12 hours later, pretended I had a team, booked a Zoom call, used a fake calendar system to seem busy. They offered $8,000 to license 5 pieces. I remember standing in my bathroom staring at the email whispering, "Holy shit," until the words lost meaning. I cried for the first time in months. Then I went back to work. I incorporated 3 weeks later, not under my name, not under page 1, but under a new title, Quill Shift Media. Safe, vague, neutral, professional enough to not raise eyebrows, personal enough to feel like mine. My father still thought I was working in digital somewhere. Nathan asked me at a family event if I was still doing poetry websites. He meant it as a joke, but I wasn't offended. He thought I was building sandcastles. He didn't know I was already holding land. My first round of investment came not from Silicon Valley, but from an unlikely source. Professor Neil Berger, my former creative nonfiction professor at NYU. He'd kept up with page 1 through an anonymous tip from a former student. He called me out of the blue. "Your voice is all over this," he said. "I remember it from your first draft. The one with the line about ghost towns and grandmothers." He offered me $50,000 in angel funding. No equity, just belief. "I've seen too many girls like you disappear into invisible brilliance," he said. "You don't have to disappear anymore." I cried again. Then I got to work. I hired 2 people. Isaac, a former classmate turned UX designer who worked for Exposure and Trader Joe's Snacks. Navia, a freelance editor from Detroit with a scathing wit and a sixth sense for tone. We met in coffee shops, co-working spaces. We texted like mad during pitch nights. We argued over font spacing and color temperatures like the future depended on it. In a way, it did. We grew to 100,000 monthly readers, then 250,000, then syndication partnerships, and finally a collaboration with a mental health nonprofit that tripled our reach in under a year. Through it all, I said nothing to my family. When Nathan launched a startup with $2 million in VC funds and failed within 9 months, the family called it a learning experience. When I hit 1 million active users, silence. Not that they knew. They still thought I was freelancing. My apartment changed. My phone didn't. I still used a cracked iPhone, still walked instead of Ubering, still wore sweaters from college. Not out of humility, out of instinct. I knew how people looked at success, especially women with quiet eyes and no trust fund. If they couldn't understand it, they'd discredit it. So I stayed quiet, built deeper, launched a sub-brand, acquired a smaller archive, hosted the first Invisible Voices Summit in Toronto, all before age 30, all without a single feature in Forbes, because I never gave them my name. I watched as my father gave a keynote about nurturing the next generation of literary minds. Nathan sat beside him. My name didn't come up. That night, I booked the final segment of their next gala, under Quill Shift. No names, just terms. Exclusive creative control. Final speech slot. Full production discretion. No one read the clause. Of course they didn't. They were too busy clinking glasses with legacies. I didn't build an empire on vengeance. But it made one hell of a view once I got here. Family dinners at the Sterling House always felt more like board meetings with the hors d'oeuvres. The menu was curated. The wine was pre-decanted. The seating was strategic. Who sat closest to my father, who was flanked by power, who was silently excused to the edge. When I received the group text from my mother that read, "Family dinner this Sunday, 7 p.m., dress nicely," I considered not going. But old habits die like old grudges, slowly, painfully, and never without protest. I said yes. It was raining, the kind of rain that seemed personal, sliced sideways by wind, mean and surgical. I showed up in my thrifted navy trench, soaked through at the bottom. My hair was tied back in a low bun, not out of style, but practicality. I didn't own a $600 umbrella. I didn't care to. The doorman at my parents' building didn't recognize me. That wasn't new. "Delivery?" he asked, eyes flicking to the paper bag in my hand. "Family," I said. He looked uncertain. Buzzed anyway. Inside, the Sterling apartment smelled like money, but not new money. Not cologne and concrete money. Old money. Pine polish. Lemon oil on dark wood. Dustless chandeliers. It was exactly as I remembered. That uncanny stillness. Like the house had been cryogenically frozen the moment I moved out, and they just unwrapped it when important people were coming over. My mother opened the door herself. "Ava," she said, voice like pressed linen. "You're early." I wasn't. I was on time. But in this house, precision was deviance. "You look..." She hesitated, then pivoted. "Come in. Everyone's already seated." Of course they were. The dining room hadn't changed. 12 chairs, though only 7 were filled. A table long enough to hold a Cold War negotiation. I was assigned the seat closest to the window, the farthest from the head. I'd sat there since I was 13. Nathan gave me the kind of smile people save for TSA agents, polite, vacant, temporary. "Hey, stranger," he said. I nodded. The dinner began like all Sterling dinners. Wine poured without request. First course plated without ceremony. Conversation staged like a TED talk. My father opened with market chatter, publishing trends, a think piece he wrote for The Atlantic that was already being quietly floated to the Times. Nathan interrupted to announce his latest project, a literary incubator for next-gen creatives. I nearly choked on my soup. My mother beamed. "It's so refreshing to see you leaning into culture, Nathan." Culture. I kept my eyes on my spoon. "What about you, Ava?" my father said suddenly, as if the thought had just occurred to him. "You're still doing... what was it? Freelancing?" There it was, the ritual slap, neatly wrapped in forced curiosity. "Still writing?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. My father nodded like I'd said I was bartending part-time. "Well, there's something to be said for simplicity," he replied. "Some people thrive without pressure." Nathan chuckled, low and knowing. I looked around the table. 7 people, 6 faces I'd memorized since birth. 1 seat between me and the corner wall. Nowhere to go. No one to ally with. This was always the shape of things. The main course arrived. Roast duck with blood orange glaze, my mother's seasonal specialty. "Ava?" she said with a porcelain smile. "I had Margot make a separate plate for you. I remember you never liked duck." I hadn't said that since I was 15, but I nodded. She waved a hand and the housekeeper brought out a chilled salad, barely dressed, iceberg lettuce, 3 slivers of radish, no protein. "I hope this is still your style," my mother added. "It's fine," I said, stabbing a leaf. When the conversation turned to the upcoming gala, I said nothing. They didn't expect me to. My father was outlining Nathan's speaking slot opening remarks, a toast, something about symbolic passing of the torch. "Of course," my father added. "The Sterling Foundation will still lead, but it's good optics." "Isn't Quill Shift sponsoring it?" someone asked Lydia, my cousin, I think. My fork paused midair. Nathan laughed. "Some digital non-profit. Dad's people say it's mostly marketing." I smiled to myself. "We're letting them have the closing segment," my father said, as if explaining an insult. "Gives them a sense of importance. It's good to support the little guys." The little guys. I took another bite of my salad. "Maybe Ava should come," Nathan said suddenly. The table quieted. My mother blinked. "She's still in the arts, right?" The word arts sounded like a condition. My father shrugged. "Let's not embarrass her. It's a formal event. High-level networking, maybe next year." He sipped his wine. "Better to watch online," he added. "You'll enjoy it more from home." I said nothing, because what was there to say? My empire sat 10 stories above this table. It watched them through tinted windows. It built exits from the very traps they designed. Dessert was served. Pavlova. My mother's attempt at modernity. She placed a single slice in front of me. "Still not too sweet?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled like she'd done something kind. As I got up to leave, Nathan stood too. "Let's catch up sometime," he said. I said nothing. In the hallway, my mother followed me to the elevator. "Ava," she said gently, "don't let these things get to you." "These things?" She sighed. "The world isn't always ready for soft ambition." I pressed the elevator button. "Not everyone needs to be a legacy," she added. The doors opened. "Good night, Mom?" Outside, the rain had stopped. The sidewalk glistened under the street lamps like spilled mercury. Across the street, taped to the glass of a lamppost, was a flyer. Quill Shift presents Voices You've Never Heard Stories. You'll never forget live projection, Saturday. Final gala segment. I stood there looking at it, a half second longer than necessary. Then I pulled the hood over my head and smiled. Everyone at the gala thought Quill Shift was a tech-backed initiative, a faceless grant-funded think tank that dabbled in literature because someone's niece wrote a poem once and cried in a conference room. That's how I designed it. No photos of leadership, no public-facing board, no bios, just a mission: to amplify unheard voices in spaces built to silence them. It read like nonprofit fluff. It was actually a warning. 3 months before the gala, I secured the main sponsor slot for the Sterling Foundation's Winter Gala. It wasn't hard. People who inherited power rarely read the fine print, especially when it's buried under politeness, flattery, and numbers that feel generous. $400,000. That's what I wired from the Quill Shift's marketing budget to the foundation's account, half up front, half on delivery. In exchange, I received naming rights to the gala's closing segment, total creative control of that segment, 1-minute voiceover or speech placement, production provided by the foundation, pre- and post-event branding on all materials, a clause tucked quietly in the final exhibit rider. If the presenting sponsor chooses to represent themselves directly or through brand alter identity, no prior vetting shall be required. That clause was mine, drafted by Mina, a contract lawyer I met in a Reddit thread about IP theft. She rewrote the language to feel forgettable. I paid her in Ethereum and silence. The only person at the foundation who noticed anything was Diana, the assistant event coordinator. I met her once briefly in the pre-production Zooms. She looked young but sharp, the kind of sharp that doesn't speak up, not until the blade is necessary. "I just wanted to confirm," she'd said, voice low, "that the voiceover copy you submitted is from the Quill Shift founder herself?" I smiled over the camera. "Yes," I said, "every word." She nodded. "Brave piece." "Uncomfortable truth," I corrected. She smiled faintly. "That's what makes it brave." She didn't ask again. Over the next few weeks, Lauren, still unaware of my connection, coordinated with my father's team. She forwarded their tone-deaf revisions. "Can we swap out erasure for underrepresentation? Feels gentler. Can we add a thank you to the foundation? Is it too late to show our founder's face somewhere?" I vetoed all of it. Then I sent them version B, the one written with intentional ambiguity and lyrical softness, a distraction, while we prepared version C. Version C had my name, not my legal name, but the name I'd carved through 6 years of publishing under firewalls and broken contracts. A.V. Sterling, founder, 3 seconds on screen. White text, black backdrop, no flourish, no apology. It would appear at the very end like a signature on a letter that's already been read. Meanwhile, I watched my father's media rollout. Interviews, sound bites, Nathan giving sneak previews of his speech on LinkedIn. The theme? Legacy and the future of voice. The irony was surgical. Lauren scheduled a final on-site run-through the Thursday before the gala. She didn't know I was already there. I arrived early, walked through the old Harper's building like a ghost with blueprints. The main hall had changed. What once held printing presses and editorial benches was now marble and spotlight, a cathedral for the curated. In the back, the AV team was testing the final segment. I stood behind the tech booth, hood up, glasses on. The voice came through my voice low, even, quiet enough to make people lean in. They said my words were too strange, that no one would want to hear me, but I spoke anyway. One of the techs turned. "Who wrote this?" he asked. No one answered. The production designer, a woman named Kira, adjusted the lighting notes. "It's gonna land hard," she said. "It's got that heartbreak weight." She had no idea. I wanted to hug her. That night, I walked the edges of the building like an architect of fire, checked the branding plaques, tucked business cards with QR codes behind water stations and catering menus, tiny time bombs. Anyone who scanned the code would be redirected to a site titled The Unspoken, Anonymity, Inheritance, and the Spaces That Forget Their Daughters. It had no introduction, only stories. 15 of them, all anonymous, all true, written by women and queer creatives from wealthy families who erased them. I was one of the stories, but you couldn't tell. That was the point. Back at the apartment, I barely slept. Not from nerves, from clarity. I'd spent years wondering how to explain myself to my family. I used to imagine long monologues, courtroom scenes, emotional speeches that left them teary-eyed and apologetic. I gave that up when I realized power is the only language they respect. You can't talk your way into being visible. You show up so loudly that your silence becomes the story. The night before the gala, my mother called. "Ava," she said, voice syrupy. "Just checking in. I know you're not attending, but I wanted to say you were thought of. Not invited, not welcomed, but thought of." "Thanks," I said. She hesitated. "You're doing something noble, I think. All this writing. It's not exactly our world, but it's fine," I said. Let her float in ignorance. She was 24 hours from witnessing what happens when a ghost decides to haunt in high definition. That night I lit a candle. Not for hope, not for superstition, for marking. It was my ritual. One flame, one chair, one untouched drink beside it. A moment of stillness before the world changes, not suddenly, but completely. The gala was held at the Wyndham Pavilion, a glass-wrapped fortress in Midtown. The kind of place with carpet so soft it quiets guilt and ceilings high enough to forget shame. The kind of venue you book when you want to signal to the world, we still matter. Tremble accordingly. The theme was legacy and voice. The irony, I hoped, would punch someone in the throat. I wasn't invited. I attended anyway. I arrived in a black silk jumpsuit. No designer label. No accessories loud enough to whisper status. Hair pinned up, face bare, but clean. Just enough to blend in with the interns, the assistants, the background, the untagged. That was the trick. People look for threats in sequence, not in silence. Inside, the ballroom hummed like a waiting lung. Strings played something expensive and forgettable. Glasses chimed. Waiters floated like well-dressed ghosts. The crowd was predictable: CEOs, legacy hires, foundation darlings, old men with white teeth and short-term memories. My father stood by the champagne wall, flanked by alumni of power, a senator, a publishing titan, a woman who once ghostwrote for the White House and now taught conscious storytelling at Yale. Nathan was on his phone, angling his face into good light, probably uploading a pre-gala reel about shaping the future of creative culture. His caption would read, "Ungrateful." Mine would have said, "Just warming up." Lauren spotted me from across the room. Her brows flicked in surprise, but she said nothing. She knew. Not the whole thing, but enough. I gave her a half smile, the kind that says, "You'll want to stay until the end." She dipped her chin. Respect. That was new. The early segments were forgettable. My father delivered the opening remarks with the precision of a man who had trained charisma into obedience. Nathan followed with a bloated speech about mentorship, legacy, and giving back to the creative community. He said creative 6 times in 3 paragraphs. Never once said artist. The difference was everything. My seat wasn't near the stage, wasn't on the guest list at all. I stood by the side paneling, behind a marble column next to the emergency exit. From there, I could see everything: the stage, the faces, the space between words and reactions. It was perfect. At 8:34 p.m., the screen flickered. The house lights dimmed. The AV led someone I'd never met, but trusted through 6 degrees of NDAs and encrypted bro box links. Gave the signal. The music faded. A white screen. Silence. Then they told me to be quiet. That silence was safety, and safety was virtue, but safety is just the tax we pay for their comfort. My voice, low, slow, measured, not performance, not anger, just presence. The room tensed. It always does when something doesn't begin with a quote or a punchline. The screen shifted. A black and white collage of lips stitched shut with thread, hands covering mouths, crowds walking by without looking. Then, they called me sensitive. Said I took things too personally. I did, because they were personal. My mother froze. I could see her from behind the screen light, glass midair, smile dimmed, one hand clutching the base of her wineglass like it might float away if she let go. My father didn't react. Years of boardrooms had trained his face into marble, but his hand tightened around the stem of his glass just slightly, enough for the vein to show. Nathan was scrolling through his phone. He looked up, paused, then came the projection. A white slide, black text, simple, final. This is for the daughters who were told to stay home. Ava Sterling, founder, Quillshift. My name wasn't shouted, it didn't need to be. The silence that followed did all the work. There was no applause, not yet. People were unsure, uncomfortable. They didn't know if it was art or protest, didn't realize it could be both. A few leaned to whisper. A few scanned the program to double-check what they'd just seen. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. The screen faded to black. A final QR code appeared. White. Minimal. Lauren had helped time it. It led to a live story feed, The Unspoken. People scanned it out of habit. Within seconds, the ballroom Wi-Fi pinged with 50-plus simultaneous hits. Within minutes, phones buzzed with notifications. Within the hour, screenshots were circulating on Twitter and Threads. One post had already been retweeted 2,000 times. Holy shit. The main sponsor of the Harper Gala just called out their own family. This is surgical. My father stood. He looked around like someone just stole the stage from under him. Nathan followed suit. He leaned over and whispered something to the coordinator. She nodded, hurried off. Damage control had begun, but it was already too late. People were murmuring now. The whispers were snowballing into something heavier. Someone stood near the catering tables saying, "Wait, was that the daughter? The one they never talk about?" Another voice, "She runs Quill Shift? I thought that was run by a group." And then the quote, "This is for the daughters who were told to stay home." They kept repeating it, like gospel. In the back, Diana, the assistant coordinator, walked past me. She paused, did a small, nearly imperceptible bow. I nodded back. The gala continued. Technically. The lights came back on. A quartet played a soft interlude. The next speaker was introduced, but no one listened. They were all on their phones, reading. I left before dessert, slipped out the same way I came, quietly, unannounced. The night air was sharp and full of clarity. As I walked away, I could still hear the music, but it sounded different now, like a requiem. I didn't win, not in the traditional sense. There were no trophies, no apology letters, no interviews, but by morning, Quill Shift had 80,000 new subscribers. 4 major outlets had picked up the story, and the foundation's board had called an emergency meeting. Sometimes revenge doesn't explode. It leaks, it whispers, it grows roots in the cracks they never bothered to patch, and then it flowers beautifully, publicly in a space they thought they owned. 1. The next morning, Ava. I woke up to 13 missed calls, 31 texts, and 4 DMs from people I hadn't spoken to since undergrad. Half of them said things like, "Holy shit, I didn't know you were her. Was that real? Can I interview you for my podcast?" The other half didn't say anything at all, just sent screenshots, or tweets, or the link to The Unspoken, forwarded again and again and again. Quill Shift's server hit capacity by 7:12 a.m. Our emergency backup kicked in by 8 a.m. By noon, the cut requested an exclusive. By 1 p.m., Harper and Lang, the foundation's publishing arm, issued a statement. "We support all voices, even those that choose unorthodox channels to be heard." They didn't name me. Of course they didn't. Naming me would have meant acknowledging what they erased. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't share, because the point had already been made. Now they had to sit with it. 2. Nathan, the Silver Sun. Nathan hadn't been this quiet since our grandmother died. He sat at our father's kitchen island, staring into a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The espresso machine hummed in the background, like it was mocking him. "You knew she was doing this?" he asked our mother. She didn't answer. "She's humiliated us." Still no answer. I mean, is she even allowed to use her name like that? Quill Shift's not even a real publishing house. It's a blog, a glorified journal. Our mother finally looked up. "She built it." "What?" "She built it from nothing," she said, voice distant. "No loans, no favors, just words." Nathan blinked. "She stole the show. She took back a room that never let her enter." He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened Instagram. His last post, a photo from the gala, had comments like, "Who's the real legacy now? Did your sister sponsor this?" "LMAO, she ate." He turned the phone over, stared at the marble. He didn't speak for the first 36 hours. Not at home, not at the office, not during the board meeting where half the sponsors pulled out, pending clarification. At 11:03 p.m. on Sunday, he sat alone in the study, sipping Lafroig like it might erase history. The screen still showed her name, Ava Sterling, founder, Quill Shift. He had Googled it 6 times, read every article, every tweet, every quote. He even found one from The Atlantic, the same magazine he'd written for. The headline, "She was erased by her family. So she wrote herself into power." He'd tried to call her 3 times. The first went straight to voicemail. The second rang, then stopped. The third was blocked. In a small drawer behind his desk, he kept old printouts. One was a poem, typed, unpublished, from when Ava was 15. He'd thrown it out once, then retrieved it from the trash. He read it now, lines like wounds. "A daughter is not born with proof. She earns it or disappears." He poured another drink. Didn't cry? Couldn't. Twitter moved fast. The story trended under hashtag Sterling Silenced. The New York Times ran a full profile within 2 days, titled, simply, "The Invisible Founder." It opened with, "When Ava Sterling's voice filled the Wyndham Pavilion ballroom." Most of the guests didn't know who she was, but by the end of the night, they couldn't stop repeating her words. Quill Shift's inbox overflowed. Writers, readers, survivors, people who'd been told to sit down. "Shut up. Stay out of the room." One message read, "You said what I've been trying to say my whole life," and they listened. Corporate reached out too. Branded partnerships, film options, a Netflix docuseries pitch. Ava declined most of them, because this wasn't about exposure, it was about reclamation. The foundation's next event was cancelled for re-evaluation. Nathan's startup lost 2 major investors citing values misalignment. Ava's LinkedIn inbox now read like an apology wall. Former classmates, professors, old bosses. "Didn't realize it was you. Wish I'd paid more attention back then. You always had that spark." She didn't reply to any of them, because this story wasn't theirs. Lauren sent her a voice note. "You were brilliant, not just loud, strategic, surgical. You didn't destroy them, you just made sure they finally saw the mirror." Ava responded, "They saw it. What they do with it, that's their reckoning." She sat on her balcony 3 days after the gala. No wine, no music, just dusk and air and a quiet that didn't ache. The city pulsed below. But she wasn't below it anymore. She was above, not in height, but in truth, and that was everything. In her drafts folder was a letter, addressed, "To the man who taught me silence." She never sent it, never would. But it ended like this. "You were right. I didn't belong in your world. That's why I built one that doesn't need you. Avenue Power doesn't feel like thunder. It doesn't crack or blaze or roar. It feels like silence that no longer scares you. It feels like entering a room without shrinking. It feels like finally not needing an apology to move forward." 3 weeks after the gala, I stood in the lobby of a glass building in Dumbo. 10th floor, full lease. It was Quill Shift's new headquarters. It wasn't fancy. No chandeliers, no velvet chairs, just warm brick walls, steel beams, open shelves full of pages, stories, manuscripts, testimonies from the forgotten, and light. So much light. That's what I wanted. That's what I'd never been allowed. Lauren was already inside. She'd come on full time. Left the foundation the morning after the fallout. "I didn't want to be part of a place that mistook inheritance for impact," she'd said. I gave her an offer letter the same day. She accepted in silence, with eyes. The rest of the team was small. 6 people, all writers, all survivors, all people who knew what it felt like to be muted and called soft. We didn't hire resumes, we hired scars. In the first team meeting, I said, "This isn't just a publication, it's a platform that fights amnesia. We don't just tell stories. We return voices to people who had them stolen." Nobody clapped. They nodded. Hard. Like they knew exactly what it meant, because they'd lived it. Outside, the world had moved on. Twitter found a new outrage. Podcasts spun Ava's name for clout. Nathan tried to pivot his brand to inclusive innovation. My father went silent. I heard whispers he was meeting with PR teams trying to decide whether to address the Ava thing publicly. He never did. One day, I received a parcel. No return label, just my name in fine cursive. Inside, a leather-bound journal. A newspaper clipping from the Harper's memoir launched the one I was excluded from. A typed note on foundation letterhead. "Ava, your words were always sharp. I just didn't understand where they were pointing. I see it now. I still don't agree with how you did it, but I know I'm not the one you're doing it for. Dad." I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just closed the box and put it under my bed, because not everything needs burning. Some things just need burying. The Unspoken became a traveling exhibition, partnered with 6 city libraries, each display. Anonymous stories from people erased by their own, printed on glass, projected in light, unattributed, unapologetic. We called it The Rooms They Locked. People cried in those halls, not because it was sad, but because someone had finally written the silence out loud. Media asked if I'd ever return to the foundation, if I'd consider reconciling. I didn't answer, because survival isn't about reunion, it's about refusal. Nathan posted a photo of himself in Bali with the caption, "Taking time to recalibrate. Mental health matters." I scrolled past. My mother called only once. Voicemail, no name. "Just wanted to say you look so much like your grandmother these days, strong, even when you don't speak." I saved it, but I didn't call back. One night in bed, I reread the Gala transcript. The lines they all heard, the words they couldn't delete. I realized something. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was a reintroduction. You spend your life trying to be enough for people who wrote your outline before you could speak. And one day, if you're lucky if you survive, you write over it. not to erase what they said, but to say something louder, something true. Lauren asked weeks later as we walked past the river, "Do you ever wish you'd burned it all down?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. Number that would have meant they were the center. She smiled. We kept walking. That's the thing about storms. People think they end when the sky clears, but they don't. They end when the earth heals differently than it grew before, and I had become a forest fire they didn't know they planted. It came on a Wednesday, the kind of day that doesn't expect anything. Gray sky, half-eaten croissant, Spotify on low, me answering emails in a hoodie with coffee stains on the cuff. Then subject, partnership proposal, Harper and Lang Foundation. I stared at it, didn't open it right away. I already knew what was inside. An hour later, a second email followed. From Lauren. Just saw this hit your inbox. You okay? Want me to draft a response? I didn't answer yet. Instead, I clicked the first message. Dear Ms. On Sterling, we write to you with a proposition of mutual respect and forward thinking. In light of your powerful work with Quill Shift and the resonance of the unspoken exhibit, the Harper and Lang Foundation is interested in exploring a co-sponsored series on narrative justice and intergenerational dialogue. We are prepared to offer full creative control, shared branding, and a permanent residency within our foundation archives. The board, including your father, believes your voice is vital to the cultural fabric we aim to uphold moving forward. Please let us know if you are open to a conversation. Eleanor Marks, Chief Programs Officer. It took me 5 tries to read the whole thing. Not because I was emotional, because I kept laughing. They wanted me to help curate the voice they once asked to mute. Now they wanted me to design the acoustics. Lauren called. I picked up. She didn't say hello, just, so, we burning it or archiving it? I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, what do you think they're afraid of? She paused. Then, that you'll say yes, or that you'll say no. Later that night, I walked the High Line alone. The city glittered below like a lie you want to believe. I thought about my childhood, watching my father read press releases like scripture, practicing my voice in a mirror, being told, don't embarrass us, more often than I'm proud of you. Now they wanted to partner with the girl who once wasn't allowed at the table. I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone, typed a message in my notes app. Power doesn't always mean vengeance. Sometimes it means being able to choose not to walk through a door they once locked. I saved it, didn't post it. Some truths are just for you. The next morning, I drafted a reply. Dear Eleanor, thank you for your thoughtful message. I appreciate the Foundation's interest in collaborating with Quill Shift. The work we've done and continue to do centers on amplifying voices that have historically been excluded by the very institutions now seeking to platform them. I welcome a conversation, but only if it begins with acknowledgement, not of my success, not of the Gala moment, but of the silence you once curated. If your board is ready to name what they erased by name, then we can discuss what comes next. Warmly, Ava Sterling. I didn't hit send yet. I let it sit in drafts. Power, after all, is in the pause. That week, I had dinner with Lauren at a bookstore cafe. She brought a copy of an old chapbook I'd forgotten I ever published anonymously under a pseudonym. She flipped to one dog-eared poem and slid it across the table. You'll know it's time when they stop asking if you're angry and start asking if you'll help. I looked at her. What if I help and they just use it to look good? She didn't flinch. Then the work still lives, and you were always more honest than they deserved. 1 week later, the Foundation responded to my reply. We are open to acknowledging our past omissions, including the marginalization of voices like yours. We invite you to design the terms of such an acknowledgement. My father didn't sign the email, but his name was CC'd, and that was enough. I scheduled the meeting, not in their building, in ours, glass walls, open space, no hierarchy. I made sure they sat in folding chairs because power isn't about the podium. It's about who gets to choose the architecture of the room. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of our mission wall, the painted quote that greeted every visitor. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were the soil. I didn't greet my father, didn't hug anyone, just offered coffee, then began. I said, we don't accept partnerships built on optics. We accept them built on accountability. And then I asked, what do you remember about the night you told me not to come? No one answered, but I saw it in their faces, that fragile ripple of shame finally having a name. We didn't sign a deal that day, but we started something more dangerous, a record, one they couldn't edit. There was no grand finale, no press conference, no red carpet, no splashy launch video with orchestral music swelling in the background. There was just a table, a long one, wooden, weathered, with 10 chairs around it, one for every voice that had once been erased. The Quill Shift residency became permanent, backed quietly and conditionally by the foundation. But the conditions weren't theirs, they were mine. Rule 1. No story could be changed for comfort. Rule 2. Every reading began with a name that had once been forgotten. Rule 3. Ava Sterling never sat at the head of the table, because it wasn't about me anymore. That was the power, knowing I'd built something that would survive me without becoming me. The exhibit grew. 6 libraries became 20. 20 cities became 50. One installation was placed permanently inside the very hall where the gala was held. No plaque, no dedication, just a looping voice. This is for the daughters who were told to stay home. Tour guides didn't explain it. They didn't need to. My father never came. Not to the exhibits, not to the launch of the Quill Shift anthology, not to the acknowledgement ceremony where the foundation formally named and apologized to the voices it once muted, mine included. He sent a message through a proxy. Please tell her I've read the work. That was all. I didn't respond. Some people confuse silence for forgiveness, but for me, silence is proof I've stopped needing anything from you at all. Nathan started a new company, a podcasting startup about legacy entrepreneurs. He mentioned me in one episode, called me disruptive. I laughed for an hour. My mother called again. This time, I picked up. She didn't ask for a visit, didn't ask for explanations, just said, I saw your name on a panel. And then after a long pause, I should have asked you what you wanted. Not what would keep the peace. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I said, you can still ask. 3 months later, she sat in the front row of my keynote at Columbia. No pearls, no posture, just eyes focused, red-rimmed, real. Afterward, she didn't say, I'm proud. She said, I see it now. That was enough. At Quill Shift, we published an anthology called Rewrites, essays, poems, confessions, stories told by people who had spent a lifetime being edited by everyone but themselves. I didn't write the foreword. Lauren did. She ended it like this. This is not revenge. This is what happens when the silenced build their own microphone and then hand it to the next voice. One day, a girl named Ren visited, barely 20, hair shaved on one side, eyes like she saw everything twice. She stood in front of the Rooms They Locked exhibit for 25 minutes, then came up to me somehow knowing who I was and said, I didn't know you could be this loud without screaming. I smiled. You can be thunder, I said, without ever raising your voice. The final scene, there isn't one, because stories like this don't end. They just grow quieter, stronger, wider. They outlive the names that tried to contain them. On my office wall now hangs a framed print. It's just black ink on cream paper. No title, no author name, just these lines. They left me out of the room. So I built one where the walls were made of story and the doors didn't need permission. Sometimes people still ask, do you regret not confronting them more? Not destroying them publicly? And I always say the same thing. What's more devastating than watching someone become undeniable right after you wrote them off? I walked past my father once at Gala 2 years later. He looked at me, recognized me, didn't speak. I didn't stop either, but I smiled. Not the cold smile of revenge, the kind that says, you once told me to stay home, and now the whole house speaks in my voice. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.